So this week's topic's going to be,
A pretty interesting one.
yeah, very interesting. As a child, I heard that in the Muslim world, homosexuality is rife. It's hidden, yet it's there.
Yeah.
And so many people don't want to do research and find out for themselves or look at videos about those kind of things. And I've been thinking how many homosexual Muslims have been murdered
Yeah, also true.
by their own people,
Yeah.
and yet they don't know about something Muhammad. So I think it is horrific. Yes, in the Bible it is spoken about, but there is hope. That is the whole thing. There is hope for change. There's hope for restoration. Whereas with the Muslims, there is no hope.
Yeah.
But yet, back at the ranch, the so-called perfect, awesome founder is it's just perfect.
There's just a great level of ignorance regarding these things that they're simply not aware of the religion that they follow.
Yeah.
They get taught surface level things that seem okay and seem very nice and very noble and all these sorts of things, but when you start looking at the sources and you start reading the writings and doing your own homework, you start finding that, man, it is not all moonlight and roses. And it's weird that people wouldn't take the time, especially making such a life-changing decision about choosing a religion. Why wouldn't you take the time to come to the conclusion based on what you found, as opposed to just believing what everybody else says about this religion? Why wouldn't you find it out for yourself?
I am always wary of, if you can't ask, if you can't come to your own conclusions, why? I mean, what are you hiding?
Yeah.
This week I was actually watching something, I can't think of it now, but there was this one young Western man, and he's got no qualms about actually being forced to become Muslim. Well, you can't actually become one.
Yeah.
That's like saying, if a white person lives amongst black people, you can actually become black. And they do not accept you, really.
Yeah. I think there's always this, from what I've just seen with all the debates and things that I've watched regarding Islam and converts to Islam, you never really considered an authentic Muslim
Yeah.
If you're a convert, especially if you're a convert from a Western society.
And then, so you, being a white Westerner, with a Westerner's mindset, convert, and when the Muslims start their so-called jihad, your own family and friends are going to get killed. So you're basically only thinking about yourself. We're going to be reacting to a video when Muhammad went on his night ride.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it.
Cherished by Muslims for containing the instructive and edifying words and deeds of their beloved Prophet Muhammad, the hadith also serves as one of the most potent weapons, one of the most potent polemics against Islam. It is, in fact, a double-edged sword, so let's look into it. During the conservative, patriarchic, and hyper-tribalism of 7th century Arabia, trust me when I say that Muhammad was introducing a radical and shocking idea, even then. Which brings me to my point. How the Arabic program I recently watched validated these 2 points. First, that the bizarre and unflattering accounts of Muhammad contained in the hadith contradict the idea that the hadith is a lateral forgery meant to give Islam a noble foundational story revolving around a pious and upright prophet. And, much more importantly, second, that the hadith, because it does capture the essence of Muhammad, remains the chief weapon against Islam. Now, the debate I watched centered around a hadith that, though long hidden, first started reaching the general populace of the Arabic-speaking world via satellite programs, I'd say around 2015-ish or so. This odd hadith, which I'm about to narrate, appears in several hadith collections, including the highly esteemed Musnad of Ibn Hanbal, founder of one of Islam's 4 schools of laws, or madhahib, as well as in many other well-respected Islamic texts, all of which are being taught in Al-Azhar. The hadith, which is narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud, a companion of the Prophet and one of Islam's most reliable and trustworthy transmitters of a hadith, goes as follows. Brace yourself. Abdullah begins by telling us that Muhammad called on him to accompany him on a trip into the desert. When they reached a certain place and night had fallen, Muhammad made a line in the sand, most likely a circle, and told Abdullah, quote, "Stay behind this line and do not cross it, for if you do, you will die." Muhammad then left his startled companion and walked into the desert night, about the distance of a hurled stone, says Abdullah. Before long, our narrator saw a group of men, he does not specify how many, who, quote, appeared to be al-Zutt. He describes them as, quote, tall, lean, and naked. Other Islamic sources say these Zutt were a black-skinned people, and we'll get into that later. After describing them, Abdullah goes on, and here's the problematic part, to say, quote, they went to and began to ride the Prophet of Allah. Literally, that's what the Arabic says. These tall, black, naked men rode Muhammad. The Arabic word yarkabun, which I will presently discuss, can also be translated as mounted. And they did this all night long, says Abdullah. During which time they would also come and circle around and try to reach him, but they were prevented, apparently from the line of protection Muhammad had drawn in the sand for his companion. Abdullah concludes his narration, quote, I was extremely terrified by them, so I sat down. With the coming of dawn, they began to depart. Then the Prophet of Allah returned, slowly and in pain, from that which they did while riding him.
How many times had these nightly meetings happened in the past?
Yeah.
Nobody just wonders.
That's right. It does seem like it would...
In the night time, amongst sand dunes, and you just suddenly happen to come across people.
It does seem like this wasn't the first time it happened. It could have... Well, it does sound like that this was the first time that Muhammad was with that companion of his.
Yes.
So maybe this was new to the companion, but it wasn't new to Muhammad.
No.
It does seem like this was somewhat of a regular occurrence.
That line that he actually drew in the sand.
The circle of protection.
Well, circular protection line. Was that supposed to actually protect his friend? Because I reckon
so.
the only thing that actually protected his friend was that he sat down.
Yeah. So it does seem that these old Zutts, they were, in a sense, at least sympathetic to the friend. And they recognized that he didn't give his consent to be mounted like
Muhammad.
Prophet Muhammad, fake Prophet Muhammad. So the very fact that he chose to sit down and they honored the fact that he didn't want to, at least shows some kindness on Al-Zutt's part, I suppose. The fact that they saw, okay, this guy's not giving his consent. And then it also goes to show, conversely, that clearly Muhammad wanted to be mounted.
Yes.
He wanted to.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if Muhammad did the same thing as his friend did by sitting down, they probably wouldn't have mounted him. But the fact is, he clearly wanted it to happen.
Yeah, like when you actually meet a person and you sit down, you're actually submitting in a way, okay?
Sure.
Or I'm submitting to you, so do not hurt me. Because if there is two people and they're same height, same amount of strength, it could be seen as, I'm going to take you out, you could take me out, or whatever.
Yeah.
But maybe in that culture, if until you sat down, you were like, do not harm me.
According to another narration found in several Islamic texts, including Akhbar Mecca by Al-Fakahi, Muhammad complained to Abdullah that, quote, they wounded me all night long, at which point the Prophet proceeds to lay his head and fall asleep in Abdullah's lap. Needless to say, the highly unflattering implications of this hadith are clear. But it becomes even more scandalous once one brings in what several other Islamic reference books and histories say. For starters, who are these al-Zutt, these naked men who rode Muhammad all night long? According to Islam's written records, they were a migrant people from India or modern-day Pakistan, described in the sources as very tall, very dark-skinned, very lean, strong and hardy, and often used for labor-intensive work. In early Arabic ethnographies and literary works, al-Zutt are also depicted as being very sexual and virile, with very large penises. In fact, according to one Arabic source, Al-Tashibbahat by Ibn Abi Awan, quote, the penis of al-Zutt never weakens, meaning their large phalluses never go limp and are ever ready. I'm sorry for the crude language, but this is what the Islamic texts say, verbatim. Now let's talk about the Arabic word translated as ride, as in al-Zutt rode the Prophet. Not only does it have the same exact meaning in English, as in to ride a horse, for example, but it carries the same slang meaning, as in copulating with a woman. In fact, several Islamic sources use it literally to mean sex. For example, while commenting on the famous hadith, also in Musnad ibn Hanbal, where Muhammad says, quote, women, dogs, and donkeys cancel a man's prayer, Al-Qurtubi, one of Islam's most celebrated commentators of the Quran, elaborates by saying, quote, a woman may be compared to a cow, horse, or camel, for all are ridden. It's also interesting to note that when al-Zutt begins circling and trying to reach our terrified narrator, Abdullah, his first instinct was to sit down. Was he trying to hide and protect that one part of his body, which these naked men were apparently trying to access? That is his bottom, by sitting down. Again, as I think you can see, this hadith is scandalous. Not the sort of thing you'd expect people who want to fabricate an honorable prophet would make up. Nor, I can assure you, was such a deed, done hidden in the desert night, deemed normal or acceptable among the Arabs of Muhammad's time. Now, during the debates I've watched over this hadith, others, including many former Muslims, regularly make even more troubling connections. For example, they cite the well-known hadith where Muhammad is asked, quote, will the people of paradise have sex? And his answer, quote, yes, with a vagina that never tires and a penis that never weakens. The phrase "a penis that never weakens" is identical to the aforementioned description of al-Zutt's genitalia, suggesting, as many former Muslims are quick to point out, that Muhammad so enjoyed his night with these naked black men that he went on to secretly enshrine its most notable aspect, powerful penises that never weaken or slacken, as a characterization of paradise, and possibly as an inside joke with himself. To sum up, based on numerous Islamic texts, especially Musnad ibn Hanbal and al-Qurtubi's tafsir, and several other historical and ethnographical texts,
I find it interesting that there's a lot of sources that mention this. There's a lot of evidence for this. So, Muslims can't attempt to backtrack and say, no, this never happened. No, this is a Christian concoction. They're making this up. Raymond is showing the evidence based on their sources.
Yeah.
This is something that they're busy telling about themselves, about their prophet. And people can't therefore use it as an excuse to say, no, Christians are just making this up.
I have heard Muslims who say, well, if you take a book, one of their books, and you actually translate it, you can't really do that. Which is also mind-blowing. I mean, really.
And also this whole thing of, unless you speak Arabic, and unless you understand Arabic, you don't have an authority to actually speak about these things.
Yeah, but it's not even actually understanding it. If you just repeat it with no until you understanding.
Well, that's it, because you see this in the 5 daily prayers that they do.
Yes, yeah.
They're speaking the words, but they have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah.
But it's just, these are things we must do.
Yeah.
What does it mean? I don't know. I just do it because it's the right thing to do.
How this hadith is understood, especially by ex-Muslims who cite it as cause for their apostasy, is as follows. And before I proceed, please note that the following summary is not based on my thoughts or words, but rather the words of, first, as we saw, well-respected Muslim texts, and second, those who use this hadith as a polemic against Islam. I'm trying to give you an idea of what is being said and how this hadith is being presented in these debates that often flare out between Muslims. All right, here we go. Muhammad took his close companion, Abdullah, into the desert at night. He warned him to wait behind a line and went off at a distance, apparently for a pre-planned rendezvous. Before long, Abdullah saw several naked men from the people of al-Zutt appear, described in the sources as tall, lean, virile, and with large penises. These men then took turns riding or mounting the Prophet all night long. They also tried to reach him, but Abdullah immediately sat down, apparently to protect that one part of his body they were trying to access. As the sun rose, these naked men began to depart, even as Muhammad returned in pain, limping towards Abdullah and saying how al-Zutt had injured him. He then lays in his companion's lap and falls asleep. Finally, as a reflection of what Muhammad thought of that night, he went on to enshrine it as an aspect of paradise where the, quote, penis never weakens, end quote. Okay, that's what's being said and what loud shouting matches take place over. I've personally watched several satellite Arabic language shows where Muslims call in and ask an expert sheikh about this hadith. Typical responses are that 1. Al-Zutt were not humans, but rather jinn. 2. This occurred during Muhammad's famous meeting with the jinn, known in Islamic tradition as the Night of the Jinn, when the Prophet recited the Quran to them. And 3, it's known that Abdullah bin Mas'ud was not present with Muhammad during the Night of the Jinn, so therefore this hadith must be weak and likely fabricated. Such are the responses against this hadith. As we have seen, however, and as those who use this hadith as a polemic against Islam point out, the earliest references to al-Zutt all depict them as humans. And dismissing the hadith as weak on the claim that Abdullah was not present for the Night of the Jinn is itself very weak, since the night in question had nothing to do with the jinn. meaning there is no reason to doubt the words of Abdullah, a chief and highly trusted transmitter of hadith. By the way, I decided to ask ChatGPT what it thought were innocent and non-loaded questions, and as might be expected, it answered me honestly enough. First, I asked it whether Zutt were humans or jinn, to which it responded, quote, in Muslim historical sources, the Zutt were consistently described as humans, not jinn. They were portrayed as a real ethnic group, most often associated with India or Sindh, modern-day Pakistan, and as a migrant labor or military class. They are also described as a rebellious and militarily capable people. I then asked ChatGPT to give me a physical description of Zutt based on early Arabic sources, and it said, quote, in literary and anecdotal texts, they are grouped together with other southern or dark-skinned people, all of whom have the following traits: sexual potency, prominent genitalia, and associations with physical strength and virility.
We actually need to think, because this does affect our lives.
Yeah, it is a very serious thing, this.
If you're going to follow a murderer, adulterer, I'm trying to think of all the things he did, a liar,
Bisexual.
so everything that goes against the word. Where do you think you're going to actually end up?
Yeah, I mean, just logically speaking, you look at the fruit it brings.
Death.
You look at what it advocates
And
for.
chaos, yeah.
Somehow you come to the conclusion that doing all these bad things is going to result in me entering paradise. Me following the Prophet Muhammad's example is somehow going to end me up in paradise. So doing all these bad things is going to produce a good outcome. How is that possible?
I mean, it's like a Westerner, it's a bank robber, murderer, fornicator, adulterer, a drug taker, a swindler, until you're a charlatan with nothing good inside you. And you still going to actually believe that you are going to go there.
And once again, that is why Christianity has got so many superior things going for it. Even if you just had to look at objectively the teachings of Jesus versus the teachings of Muhammad, the way Jesus lived his life versus the way Muhammad lived his life. It's a stark difference, it's completely different. And it's interesting that people come to the conclusion that somehow still Islam is better. And sure, it's one thing to do it out of ignorance. It's another thing to have studied both religions and come to the conclusion that Islam is still better than Christianity.
If I had to have left Jesus and changed my mind, and now I'm suddenly Muslim, you're actually giving up the one who made you.
And also, there's within Christianity, it's the love of God for you that should be the thing that draws you. In Christianity, the Bible talks about how God loves us. So the love of God compels us to come to Him.
Yeah.
it works on your heart, because it lets you know that God is not some distant out there person, but He's right here with you all the time. The Bible says that, in, I think it's Isaiah, I'll never leave you nor forsake you.
Yeah.
And using that and having that understanding should be the thing that makes you come to the conclusion, okay, so God actually cares about me. And then that draws you closer to Him. And then you have a relationship and you start learning about all the other things in the Bible. As opposed to, once again, Islam, it's the God of Islam, Allah, Satan. There is no love.
Father is no son.
He's not a father.
Relationship.
He doesn't care about you.
Yeah. And you must just submit. And I would just like to actually add in here. And I actually went through this for a number of years, trying to fit into Christian circles. We tend to think that if Christians do not accept us, that means God is actually not really accepting us. And we tend to get that mixed up.
Yes. Yeah.
And that, I mean, there have been lots of instances in the past where, honestly, Christians can be mean.
Yeah.
And harsh and telling you controlling. And it just so happens that I think too many pastors are actually self-called to actually lead.
Yeah, self-called, self-promoted. Yeah.
Yeah. So, honestly, Jesus, Father, is okay better.